Hey guys, tonight we are going to do something a little different. We're going to take that shiny, romanticized image of a pirate you have in your head drawer, with the charming grin and the flowing shirt, and we're going to gently, lovingly tear it to shreds. We're going on a journey back to the Golden Age of Piracy, but not to find treasure or glory. We're going to find the filth. You're about to become a pirate, and I'll be honest, based on the historical reality, you might not survive the first week, let alone the first day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly means the world. And while you're at it, drop a comment letting me know what city you're listening from, then what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins with you. It's the early 18th century, and the world isn't being kind. Forget whatever life you knew. Maybe you were a sailor in the Royal Navy, tired of the brutal discipline and miserable pay. Or perhaps you were an indentured servant on some sweltering Caribbean island, counting the days until a freedom that felt more like a fantasy. You could be a fisherman with empty nets, or a former soldier with no war to fight and no skills for peace. The point is, you're desperate. You're standing in a grimy, loud, and sticky port town, let's say Nassau, or maybe Port Royal before the earthquake really finished it off. The air is thick with the smell of cheap rum, unwashed bodies, charcoal smoke, and the faint, ever-present scent of the sea mixed with sewage. This isn't a place of opportunity, it's a waiting room for the desperate, and that's when you see him. HES, not a captain in a pristine red coat. HES leaning against a stack of crates, his clothes worn but functional, his face tanned and creased by the sun and sea. But it's his eyes that get you. They hold a glint of something you haven't felt in a long time, possibility. He and his companions are buying a round of drinks in a tavern, their pockets clearly heavier than yours. They laugh loudly, a camaraderie forged in shared danger. You overhear the words that are music to your ears, a short life but a merry one. You get to talking. He doesn't promise you a pension or a safe return. He promises you a share, an equal share. He talks about the ship's articles. This is the first piece of real pirate bureaucracy you encounter. It's a contract, a code of conduct that every man on board agrees to, unsigns or makes his mark, if you can't write. This is a well-documented historical fact. Most pirate crews operated under their own set of rules. These articles laid out everything from the division of plunder to the punishment for stealing from a crewmate or bringing a woman on board. It's a democracy of thieves, and for you, a man who has only ever taken orders, the idea of having a vote in your own destiny is intoxicating. He tells you they're looking for hands. And here's a little detail. You might not know they aren't just looking for brutes who can swing a cutlass. They desperately need skilled labor. Are you a carpenter? You're invaluable for repairing the mast and hull. A sailmaker, a cooper, who knows how to maintain the precious water and drum barrels, a musician, who can keep spirits up on long, boring voyages. These skills could earn you a larger share of the treasure, maybe even a share and a half. The captain himself usually only took 2 shares. So, if you had a trade, you were a prize. You agree. Of course you agree. What other choice do you have? A life of back-breaking, soul-crushing labor for pennies, or a chance at a fortune and a taste of freedom? However fleeting, you make your mark on the damp, rum-stained parchment. In that moment, you cease to be a subject of a king or a cog in an empire. You are a brother of the coast, a man of fortune, a pirate. But historians still debate how many men like you truly had a choice. While many volunteered, the practice of impressment, forcing sailors into service, wasn't just a navy tactic. A pirate ship, short-handed and desperate for a surgeon or a navigator, might just persuade a skilled man from a captured vessel to join their ranks. Whether it was a true choice or a coerced one for many is a line that was often blurred by desperation and drum. Now, it's time to board. You follow your new comrades through the winding, muddy streets toward the harbor. And there she is, your new home. Don't picture a majestic, custom-built warship. Picture a captured merchant vessel, a sloop, or a brigantine, sturdy, practical, and looking very, very well used. The black flag isn't flying yet, that's saved for special occasions. As you step onto the gangplank, the wood groans under your weight. The dominant smell isn't salt, but tar, used to waterproof the wooden rigging. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of brine and possibility. The shore, with all its misery and certainty, recedes behind you. You are on board. The anchor is raised. Your new life has begun. You just have no idea what it will truly smell like in a week. As you find your footing on the deck, the initial sharp smell of tar begins to fade, not because it's being overpowered by a richer, more complex bouquet. This is the true scent of your new home, and it's a layered experience. The top note is the sour, stale sweat of several dozen men who consider bathing an abstract concept. Beneath that, you detect the damp, musty odor of wood that is never truly dry. And under it all, wafting up from below deck, is the bass note, a deep, stomach-turning funk of rotten, stagnant water. This smell isn't just in the air, it feels like it's coating the back of your throat. It will be your constant companion. The first thing you notice when you wake and the last thing you taste before you fall into a restless sleep. One of the older hands, a man with a web of sun wrinkles around his eyes, gestures for you to follow him below. You descend a steep, narrow ladder into the gloom. The difference is immediate. The open air of the deck, heavy atmosphere. This is the 'tween deck, your living quarters. And it is crowded. Hammocks are slung so close together that they sway in unison with the ship's roll, bumping gently against one another. Dozens of men will sleep here, packed in like salted fish in a barrel. Your personal space is now a concept as foreign as a hot bath. There are no portals, no ventilation to speak of. The only light comes from a single, swaying lantern, casting long dancing shadows that make the cramped space feel even more alive and claustrophobic. You're assigned a hammock, a simple strip of canvas. As you touch it, you realize it feels faintly damp, and it carries the faint, lingering scent of its previous occupant. This is where you'll sleep, eat when the weather is bad, and spend countless hours of boredom. This is the central, well-known reality of life at sea, the oppressive lack of space and privacy. Everything you own must fit into a small sea chest, which also doubles as your only bench and table. The constant creaking of the ship's timbers, the snoring unmuttering of your crewmates, the endless, gentle rocking, this will be the soundtrack to your life. But about that smell, the source of the deepest, most offensive part of it comes from the very bottom of the ship, a place called the bilge. It's not a room, it's a space. It's the lowest internal part of the hull where all the water that leaks through the planks, all the spilled grog, all the rainwater, all the vomit from seasick sailors, and all the general waste and filth of the ship eventually collects. It's a sloshing, unseen pond of pure foulness, festering in the darkness just a few feet below where you sleep. Every time the ship rolls, you can hear it, a sickening liquid shifting in the belly of the vessel. Its putrid gases rise up through the floorboards, a constant, miasmic reminder of the decay you're floating on. Now, here's a quirky little detail about managing this. Pirates and sailors weren't completely oblivious to the stench. They just had very limited tools. One of their favorite, though ultimately futile, methods of freshening things up was vinegar. On occasion, the crew would be ordered to wash down the decks, not with precious fresh water, but with sharp, acidic vinegar. It didn't truly clean anything in the modern sense of disinfection, but its powerful smell would temporarily cut through the wall of stink, replacing the odor of rotten and washed bodies with its own pungent aroma. For a few brief, glorious hours, your floating home would smell less like attunement, more like a pickle barrel. It was a small, temporary victory in a war against filth that they were destined to lose. As you settle into your hammock, trying to ignore the proximity of the man next to you in the dampness seeping into your clothes. You ponder a question that historians still debate today. Did they even notice it? After a while, did the human nose, in its infinite adaptability, simply filter out the constant stench, relegating it to background noise like the cry of a gull? Or was life on a pirate ship a state of perpetual low-grade sensory assault? Some scholars argue that the entire 18th century was a much smellier time, and that the tolerance for what we would consider unbearable odors was significantly higher. They argue the ship's funk might have been unremarkable to a nose already accustomed to the smells of a pre-industrial city. Others contend that no one could ever truly get used to a smell that potent, and that it contributed to the misery, aggression, and desperation that characterized life at sea. Was it just a normal part of life, or a constant, foul-smelling torment? Lying there in the dark, you suspect it's the latter. The lantern is extinguished, plunging the deck into near total darkness. The ship sways, a cradle rocking on an endless ocean. You close your eyes, trying to force yourself to sleep, but it's hard to relax. You can't shake the feeling that you're not alone. And I don't mean the dozens of snoring men around you. You hear something else, a faint scratching sound from inside the wall. A soft, skittering noise in the darkness above your head. The human crew, it seems, is only part of the ship's population. The scratching isn't just in your imagination. As your eyes slowly adjust to the profound darkness of the 'tween deck, you start to perceive movement in the shadows. Tiny, fleeting shapes darting along the beams, quick scurries that stop and start. Your first formal introduction to your non-human shipmates comes in the form of a fat, confident rat that ambles across a coil of rope, not 5 feet from your face. He pauses, his whiskers twitching, his beady eyes catching a stray sliver of moonlight from the hatch above. He doesn't seem afraid of you at all. Why would he be? In his mind, you are the intruder. This ship is his world, a floating buffet. And he is not alone. You soon realize the ship is teeming with them. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of black rats are living in the walls, in the cargo hold, in the bilge, everywhere. This is a universally acknowledged truth of any wooden ship from this era. They were less like vessels and more like mobile, self-contained ecosystems of vermin. The rats were a constant, nibbling presence. They would chew through ropes, gnaw on sails, and get into any food stores that weren't sealed in iron-hard barrels. At night, they become bold. You'll learn to sleep with your hands tucked into your hammock and your boots stored somewhere safe, lest you wake up to find a rat has decided to nibble on your fingernails or has taken a liking to the leather of your shoes. But the rats are just the most visible of the ship's residents. There is a whole other world of smaller, more insidious life that you'll get to know intimately. The most immediate one lives in your food. A few days out to sea, you're handed your ration for the day, a piece of salted beef, so tough it's practically wood, and a hardtack biscuit. The biscuit, also known as ship's biscuit, is the staple. It's a simple flour and water cracker, baked multiple times until it's as hard as a rock to drive out all moisture and prevent mold. It's designed to last for years. Unfortunately, it's also the perfect incubator for weevils. You look down at your biscuit in the dim light. It seems pockmarked, riddled with tiny holes. As you stare, a small, dark-headed grub wriggles its way out of one of the holes. This is the weevil larva. The biscuit is full of them. The old sailors have a technique. They don't look too closely. They tap the biscuit firmly on the table, knocking most of the adult weevils out. The larvae, they say, are just extra protein. In the dark, when you can't see what you're eating, it's easier to stomach. Some sailors even preferred to eat their biscuits in the dark for this very reason. It's a classic, if disgusting, maritime anecdote, but it was the day-to-day reality. Your choice is simple: eat the weevils or don't eat at all. You choose to eat. Then there are the cockroaches. At night, they emerge. They are everywhere. Big, glossy, and unafraid. They will scuttle over your face while you sleep, explore your sea chest, and swarm any scrap of food left unattended for more than a minute. They add their own musty, sweetish odor to the ship's already complex perfume. You'll get used to brushing them off your skin in the dark without even fully waking up. And so we come to a strange and somewhat disgusting bit of entomologic history that you're now a part of. Because of this constant shipboard infestation, certain species of insects, particularly cockroaches and weevils, became the most well-traveled creatures on the planet long before humans did. They were expert stowaways. A cockroach born in a Bristol shipyard could lay its eggs on a ship bound for the Caribbean. Those offspring might then scurry aboard a pirate vessel that captures a Spanish galleon, and from there, make their way to the Philippines. These humble, disgusting insects were accidental globalists, spreading their populations across the world, hitching a ride on the very same currents of trade and conflict that you are now a part of. The presence of all this life raises a question that historians and maritime archaeologists still wrestle with: just how much did this constant infestation affect the structural integrity and safety of the ships? We know rats gnawed ropes and sails, which was a direct safety concern. But what about the subtler damage did the burrowing of countless insects weaken vital wooden beams over time? Was a ship's hull slowly but surely being eaten from the inside out? It's hard to quantify. When a ship sinks in a storm, the official cause is the storm. But was it a storm that a sound vessel would have survived? Did decades of tiny mouths chewing away at the ship's bones contribute to a catastrophic failure? At the worst possible moment, there's no definitive way to know. But it's a deeply unsettling thought as you lie in your hammock, listening to the ship creak and groan around you, wondering just how much of that noise is the wood settling, and how much is it being actively consumed. You try to block it out. The scratching rats, the scuttling cockroaches, the wriggling weevils. You are living in a city of pests. They are your roommates, your dining companions, and a constant, crawling reminder that this ship is not just your home. It's a living, breathing, and slowly decomposing organism. And you are just one of the many parasites it carries across the vast, empty ocean. The sun is rising, and nature is calling. Urgently. Last night's meal of salted pork and weevil-laced biscuit, washed down with a mug of watered-down rum, is making its way through your system. You scramble out of your hammock, still clumsy with the ship's constant motion, and ask one of your new crewmates where a man can find some privacy. He just laughs and points towards the bow of the ship. You make your way forward, stumbling over coils of rope and ducking under the massive boom of the foresail. And there it is, the ship's head. It's not a room. It's not even a closet. It's a small, crudely constructed grating or platform, extending out over the water from the very front of the ship, near the bowsprit. Sometimes it's just a couple of planks with a hole cut in the middle. Often it's just a rope net. There are no walls. There is no privacy whatsoever. Your only shield from the eyes of your 30 or 40 crewmates is the curve of the ship's bow and the large foresail. This is the designated spot. The reason it's called the head is simple: because of the direction of the prevailing winds. This area at the head of the ship was usually downwind from the rest of the vessel. The idea was that the wind and waves would take care of the cleaning. This is a well-known piece of nautical terminology that has survived to this day. When you talk about the head on a boat, you are directly referencing this very primitive arrangement, using it as an exercise in balance, timing, and profound humility. You have to clamber out onto this precarious perch, with the sea churning just a few feet below you. The ship is pitching and drooling, so you must hold on for dear life to a nearby rope with one hand, while managing your business with the other. A sudden lurch of the ship could send you tumbling into the ocean. And if the ship is plunging into a wave, you are guaranteed a very personal, very salty, and very unwelcome bite from the sea spray. In stormy weather, this act becomes genuinely life-threatening. Men were frequently washed overboard while trying to relieve themselves. And then there's the hygiene aspect, or rather, the complete lack of it. There's no toilet paper. Your options are limited and grim. The most common tool is a tow rag, which was a long piece of frayed rope left dangling in the water. After you were done, you would haul it up, use it, and then drop it back into the sea to be rinsed for the next person. Everyone used the same rope. It was a communal, endlessly recycled piece of equipment. Think about that for a second. The concept is so deeply unsanitary it's hard to fully grasp. This was a direct vector for the spread of dysentery and other intestinal diseases that were rampant on these ships. Now, for a strange little piece of pirate etiquette tied to this system. While privacy was non-existent, there was an unwritten rule you didn't conduct business at the head while someone was on lookout duty nearby. A man perched at the very front of the bowsprit, scanning the horizon for sails, was not to be disturbed by the sights, sounds, and smells of his crewmates' morning routine just a few feet away. It was a small, practical courtesy in a world with very few of them. Breaking this rule wouldn't get you keel-hauled, but it would certainly earn you the animosity of the crew. This system, as disgusting as it was, leads to a debate that naval historians still discuss. How did these sanitation practices, or lack thereof, directly impact a pirate crew's combat effectiveness? It seems like a strange connection to make, but it's a critical one. A crew that is constantly battling waves of dysentery, with men too weak and dehydrated to climb the rigging or man a cannon, is a crew that cannot fight effectively. A ship where half the men are queuing up for the head is not a ship that can quickly respond to a threat or chase down a prize. Some historians argue that the survival of the fittest principle applied here. The pirate crews that were successful, like those of Blackbird or Black Bart Roberts, might have been, by sheer luck or by some rudimentary understanding of hygiene, slightly less disease-ridden than their rivals or their victims. Perhaps their tow rag was cleaner. Perhaps they had a slightly better location for their head. Others argue it was a universal problem, and every ship was a floating petri dish. Success was based purely on firepower, speed, and terror, and had little to do with the health of the crew's bowels. As you finish up, clinging to the rope, the salty spray hitting your face, you feel a profound sense of vulnerability. This simple, biological act has become a complicated, dangerous, and deeply public ritual. You look back at the ship, your new home, and see the men going about their duties, seemingly oblivious. You realize that the romantic image of a pirate, standing proudly at the prow of his ship, gazing at the horizon, is missing a crucial detail. Just a few feet below that heroic pose, there's a very good chance that one of his shipmates is clinging to a rope, hoping not to be washed away by a wave. It's a less than glamorous truth, and it's your new reality. The days begin to bleed into one another, marked only by the changing position of the sun. The work is hard mending sails, scrubbing the deck with coarse holy stones, and endlessly turning the bilge pump to expel the foul water from the ship's guts. It's sweaty, grimy work. The tropical sun beats down on you, and soon your body is coated in a sticky film of sweat, salt, and tar. You dream of water, not to drink, but to immerse yourself in, to wash away the ever-thickening layer of filth. You learn very quickly, is a fantasy. On a pirate ship, fresh water is more precious than gold, more valuable than rum, and more tightly guarded than the captain's own pistols. This is the absolute, unshakable truth of life at sea. Your very survival depends on it. The water is stored in large wooden casks in the ship's hold. They are the ship's lifeline. A single cask might hold over 100 gallons, but with a crew of 50 or 100 men, the supply dwindles with terrifying speed. Every man is allotted a strict daily ration, perhaps a quart or two, carefully measured out by the ship's quartermaster. This water is for one thing, and one thing only: drinking. Wasting it is a serious crime. The ship's articles, the very contract you signed, likely has a specific punishment for any man caught stealing or squandering the water supply. It could be a lashing, or worse, being marooned on the next deserted island they find. The idea of using this precious liquid to wash your body is so laughably absurd that no one even bothers to forbid it. It's simply unthinkable. So, you don't bathe. Not for weeks, not for months. You live in your own accumulating grime. The sweat dries on your skin, leaving behind a crust of salt that chafes in ditches. Dirt from your hands gets smeared on your face and arms. Any fish guts, tar, or spilled food that touches you simply stays there, becoming part of your personal landscape. The only washing you get is from the occasional rainstorm. A frantic, communal affair where the entire crew stands on deck, faces to the sky, letting the fresh water rinse away the topmost layer of filth. Or when a large wave crashes over the bow, drenching you in salt water, which only makes you feel stickier and leaves your skin raw and burning once it dries. And this brings us to a peculiar and rather foul little trick of the trade for dealing with the lack of freshwater hygiene. When hands got particularly greasy or covered in tar, sailors wouldn't dream of using their water ration. Instead, they would often urinate on their hands to clean them. The ammonia in the urine acted as a crude degrazing agent, cutting through the grime in a way that plain seawater couldn't. It sounds horrifying to our modern sensibilities, but in a world where water was life and cleanliness was a forgotten luxury, it was a practical, if disgusting, solution. You'll see older sailors do it without a second thought, a casual, everyday act of resourcefulness. The refusal to bathe wasn't just about conserving water. There was a prevailing superstition, a bit of folk medicine that sailors believed in. Many held the belief that a thick layer of accumulated body grease and dirt actually protected the skin. They thought this natural coating sealed the pores and prevented miasmas, or bad airs, from entering the body and causing fevers and other diseases. They believed that washing with fresh water would open up the pores and leave them invulnerable to sickness. In their worldview, being clean was tantamount to inviting illness. So, your ever-growing layer of personal filth wasn't just a consequence of water scarcity for some of your crewmates. It was a deliberate, protective measure. A shield of grime. This leads to an ongoing discussion among historians about the psychological impact of such conditions. How did this constant state of filth affect the pirates' self-perception and their interactions with the clean world? Some theorists suggest that this profound physical separation from conventional society reinforced their outlaw status. By abandoning the basic rituals of cleanliness, they were symbolically, as well as literally, rejecting the norms of the world they had left behind. They were no longer part of that polite, washed society. Their smell became a part of their identity, a warning signal to others that they lived by a different set of rules. Others argue this is overanalyzing the situation. They contend that pirates didn't think about it in such philosophical terms. They were simply trying to survive, and bathing was a low-priority concern that bordered on the suicidal. The debate is about whether their filth was a byproduct of their lifestyle, or if it became a deliberate part of their countercultural identity. You look at your own hands, the dirt's so deeply ingrained in the cracks of your knuckles that it looks like tattooing. You run a hand through your greasy, salt-stiffened hair. You can feel the grit on your scalp. You catch a whiff of your own body odor, and it's a sour animal smell. You are no longer the man who stepped on this ship. That man was clean, at least by shore standards. This new man, this pirate, is being remade, layer by layer, in the filth of his new life. The clothes on your back are already starting to feel stiff, and you have a sinking feeling you won't be changing them anytime soon. That sinking feeling about your clothes was right. You boarded this ship with one set of clothes on your back, and maybe, if you were lucky, a spare shirt in a small bundle. That's it. There are no uniforms, no laundry days, and certainly no wardrobes. The clothes you are wearing now are the clothes you will be wearing in a month, and maybe the month after that. They are your work clothes, your sleeping clothes, and your battle clothes, all rolled into one increasingly fragrant package. Your sturdy linen shirt, once a respectable off-white, is now a mottled canvas of brown and gray. decorated with stains from tar, fish blood, and whatever mystery meal was slopped into your bowl last night. Your breeches, made of tough wool or canvas, have absorbed so much sweat, seawater, and general grime that they've developed this strange, rigid quality. When you take them off at night, if you even bother, they almost stand up on their own, and it chafes your skin raw in places you'd rather not think about. This is the standard state of dress for every man on board. The romantic image of a pirate in a flowing, clean, white poet shirt is a pure Hollywood invention. In reality, pirate clothing was functional, durable, and, after a few weeks at sea, absolutely disgusting. The constant exposure to the elements meant that the clothes were perpetually damp, either from sweat or sea spray. This dampness, combined with the lack of washing, created the perfect environment for mildew and mold to grow. Your clothes don't just smell bad, they have their own ecosystem. You'll learn to perform crude repairs yourself. When a seam splits, you'll sew it up with a thick needle and whatever rough thread you can find. When you get a hole in your knee, you'll patch it with a piece of canvas cut from a discarded sail. Your clothes become a patchwork diary of your time at sea. This is a far cry from the flamboyant pirate fashion you might have heard about. Captains like Calico Jack Rackham, famous for his love of calico clothing, were the rare exception, not the rule. For the average pirate, fashion was about survival, not style. And now for a truly bizarre historical detail that emerged from this culture of unwashed clothing. Pirates and sailors developed a unique method of waterproofing their hats and sometimes even the shoulders of their jackets. They would coat them in a mixture of tar and animal fat, often fish oil. This process, known as tarring, created a stiff, water-resistant surface that could shed rain and spray. It was effective, but it came with a downside, becoming sticky and releasing a powerful, acrid smell. A man wearing a tarred hat or jacket was essentially carrying his own personal, portable patch of freshly paved road. Imagine dozens of these men, all radiating the sharp scent of hot tar, packed together on a humid, tropical day. It added another complex layer to the ship's already overwhelming olfactory profile. But the real problem with never changing your clothes isn't the smell or the stiffness. It's what starts to live in them. The damp, warm, and dark seams of your shirt and breeches are the ideal breeding ground for body lice. You will soon become intimately familiar with them. The constant itching starts as a minor annoyance, a tickle here and there, but soon it becomes a maddening, relentless torment. You can't escape it. You will spend countless idle hours picking the tiny white nits from the seams of your clothes, a futile gesture that provides only temporary relief. This brings us to a historical debate that medical historians and archaeologists ponder what was the true silent killer on these ships while we focus on scurvy and battle wounds. Many historians argue that the diseases carried by lice, specifically typhus, also known as ship fever, were responsible for more deaths at sea than cannons and cutlasses combined. Typhus thrives in cramped, indignified conditions where lice can easily jump from person to person, debilitating muscle pain, headaches, and a characteristic rash. It could sweep through a crew with terrifying speed, incapacitating a ship in a matter of weeks. When archaeologists excavate naval cemeteries or find remains from this period, it's often impossible to determine if the cause of death was typhus, as it leaves no mark on the skeleton. So was the true apex predator. On a pirate ship, not a shark or a kraken, but the humble body louse. It's a compelling and deeply unsettling theory. You sit on the deck, scratching absently at your ribs. The sun is warm, and for a moment, the sea is calm. But you're not at peace. You are trapped. Trapped in a floating prison of filth and trapped inside your own clothes, which have become less like a garment and more like a mobile tenement for insects. You look at the horizon, a perfect, clean line between blue sky and blue water. It feels like a taunt. It's a vision of purity in a world that, for you, has become defined by grime. The endless, maddening itch is a constant reminder that the filth is not just around you anymore. It's on you, and it's in you. The itching that started in the seams of your clothes has now declared all-out war on your body. It is a battle fought on multiple fronts, and you are losing. Badly. The first enemy, the body lice, have successfully colonized your clothing, but now they have sent forth pioneers to new, uncharted territories. They have migrated from your shirt to your skin, and most distressingly, to your head. Head lice have found a welcoming home in your greasy, unwashed hair. The itching on your scalp is a special kind of torment. It's a persistent, crawling sensation that drives you to distraction. You scratch until your scalp is raw, leaving small cuts that then become infected in the grimy conditions. At night, you can almost feel them moving, a sensation that is guaranteed to curdle your dreams. You see your fellow pirates engaged in a constant, mutual struggle. Men sit on deck, hunched over, diligently picking the lice and nits from each other's hair. This isn't an act of tenderness, it's a necessary, desperate act of pest control, like monkeys grooming each other. It's a common, everyday sight that you quickly become a part of. One man leans forward, and another sifts through his matted hair, crushing the tiny insects between his thumbnails with a satisfying if disgusting little pop. This is the well-documented reality of life in any close-quartered, Giffinic environment of the era, from naval ships to army barracks to prisons. Lice were simply a fact of life. Your companions have all sorts of folk remedies they swear by. Some try soaking their hair in salt water, which does little more than make it stiff and even more uncomfortable. Others advocate for shaving their heads completely, a practical but drastic measure that many are willing to take for a moment's peace from the crawling horror. But the lice are just one of the creatures that have taken up residence on your person. The endless dampness and friction from your coarse clothing have led to a constellation of other skin ailments. You have rashes in your armpits and groin, angry red patches of skin that burn and sting with every movement. Small cuts and scrapes that on land would heal in a few days here become stubbornly infected. They turn into weeping sores, oozing a yellowish fluid that crusts over, cracks, and then oozes again. Your skin, your body's first line of defense, has been comprehensively breached. And here we find a particularly strange and little-known affliction of sailors from this period: tar warts. Men who worked with the ship's rigging, constantly handling ropes coated in tar, would develop a unique dermatological problem. The tar would get into their skin, clogging pores and causing black, hardened, wart-like growths on their hands and forearms. These weren't dangerous, but they were a permanent mark of the trade, a sign that a man had spent his life at sea. They were a badge of honor to some and a disfiguring nuisance to others. It was another way the ship literally left its mark on you. This constant state of dermatological distress raises a question that social historians and medical experts debate: how did these chronic skin conditions affect the pirates' notorious aggression and volatility? We know that chronic pain and discomfort can have a significant impact on a person's mood, leading to irritability, short tempers, and a propensity for violence. Is it possible that the legendary grumpiness and violent outbursts of pirates weren't just fueled by rum and a rebellious spirit? Could they have been exacerbated by the simple, maddening, unending misery of being constantly itchy, sore, and in a state of low-grade, persistent pain? Some historians argue that this physical discomfort was a significant, often overlooked, contributing factor to the volatile social dynamics on a pirate ship. Others maintain that these men were already a self-selecting group of tough, aggressive individuals, and that a few rashes wouldn't have significantly altered their fundamental nature. But it's hard to imagine that a man driven half-mad by lice, with his skin on fire from saltwater sores, would be in a particularly patient or forgiving mood. You spend a quiet moment trying to deal with your own personal infestations. You found a small patch of sunlight on the deck and have taken off your shirt, laying it out in the hopes that the heat might drive some of the lice out. You run your fingers over your own skin, feeling the rough patches, the scabs, the small, hard lumps. Your body is becoming a roadmap of your journey, with every rash and sorrel and mark of misery. You look at the other men, shirtless in the sun, and see the same landscape of affliction on their backs and arms. They are scarred, patched, and weathered, not just by the sun, but by the very environment they inhabit. The romance of the sea is a distant myth. The reality is a constant, crawling, itching battle for survival, fought on the very surface of your own skin. After weeks under the relentless tropical sun, your skin has become a testament to your new life. Forget the healthy, golden brown tin you might imagine. This is something else entirely. Your skin is a patchwork of angry red sunburn, peeling flakes, and a deep, leathery brown nest that seems to have baked the dirt right into your epidermis. You are being cured, like a piece of leather. The concept of sun protection is utterly alien. No one has heard of sunscreen. The only defenses you have are a wide-brimmed, often tarred, hat, if you're lucky enough to have one, and finding a sliver of shade behind a sail. For the most part, you are exposed. The sun's rays are a physical assault. They beat down on the deck, reflecting off the water, so you're being cooked from above and below. Your lips are perpetually cracked and blistered. The tip of your nose and the tops of your ears are in a constant state of peeling. This constant exposure leads to a well-known mariner's ailment, the weather-beaten face. The skin on a veteran sailor's face was a unique canvas. It was characterized by deep, premature wrinkles, a permanently ruddy complexion from broken capillaries, and often a scattering of small, scaly patches of sun-damaged skin. This was the direct result of a lifetime of squinting into the sun and being blasted by wind and salt spray. You can see it on the older men on the crew. Their faces are maps of 100 voyages, with every line etched by the sun and sea. But the sun and salt are only part of the story of your skin's transformation. The skincare routine on a pirate ship is a masterclass in what not to do. Your body is coated in a mixture of sweat, salt water, and grime. This abrasive, salty layer is constantly rubbing against your skin, chafing it raw. When you do get a cut or a scrape, which is constantly, from a splintered rail, a rough rope, or a clumsy moment with a knife, there is no antiseptic. Your crewmates have their own brands of folk medicine for wounds. The most common is simply to ignore it. A clean wound, they say, will heal on its own. If it's a bit more serious, someone might suggest washing it with seawater. While salt water does have some mild antiseptic properties, the water you're floating in is a soup of shipboard waste and marine bacteria, making this a questionable strategy at best. The most dramatic, and arguably most common, treatment for a wound that looked like it might get infected was cauterization. This involved heating a knife or a small piece of metal in a fire until it was red hot and then pressing it directly onto the wound. The idea was to burn the flesh, sealing the blood vessels and killing any surface bacteria. It was excruciatingly painful and often did more harm than good, causing severe burns that were even more likely to become infected. And here we arrive at a truly bizarre and counter-attention piece of pirate hygiene: the use of urine as a wound cleanser. Just as it was used to greasy hands, sailors believed that fresh urine, being sterile when it leaves the body, was an excellent antiseptic for washing out cuts. Men would urinate directly onto their own or a crewmate's wound, believing it would prevent putrefaction. While there might be a sliver of scientific basis for this, urea has some antibacterial properties. The practice was, for the most part, ineffective and deeply unsanitary. Still, in a world without access to modern medicine, people used what they had, no matter how strange it seems to us. This brings up a fascinating debate among medical historians. How much did pirates understand about infection, and how did their understanding or misunderstanding shape their medical practices? Some historians argue that pirates, through brutal trial and error, developed a rudimentary understanding of what worked. For instance, the use of tar as a sealant on wounds, though filthy, did create a physical barrier against outside contaminants. The preference for quick, dry treatments like cauterization shows a fear of what afflictions like gangrene. Others contend that their medical knowledge was pure superstition and folklore, a chaotic mix of half-remembered remedies and baseless beliefs. They argue that any recovery from a wound was due to sheer luck and the resilience of the human immune system, not any deliberate medical intervention. Was there a method to their madness, or was it just madness? The line is incredibly blurry. You look down at a fresh cut on your forearm from a slip-trigging line. It's red and angry. One of the older sailors has advised you to let the air get at it, while another has offered to piss on it for a shilling. You decide to just leave it alone for now. Your skin no longer feels like your own. It's a canvas of pain and abuse, sunburned, wind-blasted, salt-chafed, and now potentially infected. The beautiful, clear blue horizon you once admired now seems menacing. It offers no shade, no relief. It's a vast, empty expanse under a cruel and relentless sun. You are learning that on this ship, even the elements, the very air and light, are part of the assault on your body. The rhythm of your days is dictated by work, boredom, and hunger on this ship is a constant, gnawing presence. The food is not about pleasure or nutrition, it's about caloric intake, pure and simple. It's fuel to keep the machine of the crew running. Your primary source of that fuel, the cornerstone of your diet, is the hardtack biscuit you were introduced to on your first day. You've now been eating it for weeks, and the novelty, if there ever was any, has worn off completely. Each biscuit is a slab of baked flour and water, about half an inch thick and as dense as a piece of wood. It's virtually impossible to bite into it directly without risking a cracked tooth. The standard method of consumption is to break it into smaller pieces and soak it in whatever liquid you have available, usually grog, the ship's ubiquitous drink of watered-down rum. You drop the chunks of biscuit into your mug and wait for them to soften into a sludge at the bottom, which you then scoop out with your fingers or a crude spoon. This is your breakfast, and often your lunch as well. This process of soaking the biscuit serves another crucial purpose. It helps to dislodge the weevils. As the biscuit softens, the grubs and adult insects that live inside float to the surface. You learn to casually skim them off the top of your grog before you eat the mush at the bottom. It becomes a thoughtless, automatic gesture. This is the most famous and well-documented aspect of the maritime diet. The weevils were so common that sailors had names for them, calling them woodworms or bread bugs. They were just part of the recipe. The other staple of your diet is salted meat. Huge quantities of beef and pork work reserved for long voyages by being packed in barrels filled with salt. This process drew out all the moisture, making the meat incredibly tough and resistant to rot. When it's time to prepare a meal, the cook will haul a chunk of this meat out of a barrel. It's a dark, unappetizing brick, more gray than red, and covered in a crust of salt crystals. To make it even remotely edible, it has to be soaked in water for hours to draw out some of the overwhelming saltness. Even then, what you're left with is a stringy, chewy substance that tastes more of salt than of meat. It's often boiled for hours with some crumbled hardtack to create a thick, featureless to known as lobscouse or skilly-gaily. It's monotonous, bland, and incredibly salty, but it's hot and it fills your belly. And now for a peculiar and rather disgusting little secret about the ship's biscuits that goes beyond the weevils. The bakeries that supplied the Royal Navy and merchant ships, the very same biscuits that pirates would then plunder, were not paragons of hygiene. They were often filthy, rat-infested facilities. It was not uncommon for bakers to mix all sorts of adulterants into the flour to stretch their supply and increase their profits. Things like chalk, sawdust, and even powdered bone were sometimes added to the mix. So, when you're chewing on your hardtack, you're not just getting flour water and the occasional weevil. You might also be getting a bit of sawdust for fiber and some bone meal for calcium. It was a hidden and entirely unwanted nutritional supplement. The poor quality of this food leads to a constant, low-level debate among the crew, which mirrors a debate among historians today. Was the food on a pirate ship better or worse than the food on a Royal Navy or merchant vessel? The common argument is that pirates ate better. They were not bound by the strict, often meager, rations of the Navy. When they captured a ship, they would plunder its food stores first. For a short time after a successful capture, the crew might feast on fresh livestock, chickens, goats, or pigs that were being transported, and enjoy captured delicacies like cheese, wine, and fresh bread. This boom and bust cycle is a key feature of the pirate diet. However, some historians argue that on average, the pirate diet was worse. Navy ships, for all their faults, were part of a vast, organized supply chain. Their provisions, while monotonous, were generally more reliable. Pirates, on the other hand, were on their own. Between captures, their supplies could dwindle to almost nothing, forcing them to survive on the absolute dregs of their stores, eating food that even a Navy quartermaster would have condemned. So, was the pirate's life a series of brief feasts punctuating long famines, or was it a more consistently poor diet than their legitimate counterparts? The answer likely varied wildly from one ship to another. You take another bite of your salt beef, chewing endlessly. Your jaws ache. The thirst from the salt is immediate and intense, driving you to drink more grog. It's a vicious cycle. You look at the other men, silently and mechanically consuming their own meager portions. There is no joy in this act. It is pure function. The dream of pirate feasts, of whole roasted pigs on a beach, seems like a cruel joke. The reality is this: a lump of salty meat that tastes like shoe leather, and a biscuit full of bugs, eaten in a cramped, smelly space, surrounded by men who are just as hungry and miserable as you are. And tomorrow, you will eat the exact same thing. Your thirst is a constant companion, almost as persistent as your hunger. The salt-heavy diet leaves a perpetual dryness in your mouth, a craving for liquid that is never truly satisfied. Your daily water ration is precious and small, barely enough to keep dehydration at bay. So, for the most part, you drink what everyone else drinks: grog. Grog is the fuel that keeps the social engine of the ship running. Its invention is famously attributed to British Admiral Edward Vernon in 1740, who ordered the daily rum ration to be diluted with water to reduce drunkenness among his sailors. The name grog supposedly came from his nickname, Old Grog, derived from the Girogram cloak he often wore. Pirates, of course, had been drinking watered-down rum long before it had an official name. It was a practical necessity. Straight rum was too valuable and too potent to be drunk casually. Diluting it made the supply last longer and kept the crew from being perpetually incapacitated. The quartermaster dispenses the grog each day with careful ceremony. He mixes rum and water in a large open tub or barrel on the deck, called a scuttlebutt. The ratio could vary depending on the captain's generosity and the state of their supplies, but it was usually several parts water to 1 part rum. You line up with your tin cup, and he ladles out your share. The first sip is an experience. It's not a fine, aged Caribbean rum. The rum available to common sailors and pirates was often the harshest, cheapest kind, raw, fiery, and tasting vaguely of molasses and industrial solvents. The water it's mixed with is the real problem, though. The fresh water stored in the ship's barrels does not stay fresh for long. After a few weeks at sea, a green slime of algae begins to grow on the inside of the casks, turning the water murky and giving it a distinctly swampy, vegetal taste. The water becomes slimy and thick, full of things you'd rather not identify. So the grog you're drinking is a cocktail of cheap, harsh rum and slimy, algae-infested water. The rum is there as much to kill the taste of the water as it is for the alcohol. Many crews would add sugar and lime juice if they had it to their grog, creating a primitive cocktail that made the whole concoction slightly more palatable. This mixture of rum, water, sugar, and lime was essentially the direct ancestor of the modern daiquiri. But here's a little-known and truly foul detail about the ship's water supply. The barrels used to store the water were not new. They were constantly being reused. A barrel that held salted fish on one voyage might be emptied, given a quick, cursory rinse, and then filled with fresh water for the next. The lingering residue of fish oil and salt would leach into the water, giving it a faint. On other occasions, Barrels that previously held wine, beer, or even something like tar or turpentine might be repurposed. The complex, unpleasant flavor of your drinking water could be a combination of algae, old fish, and a hint of turpentine, all masked by a slug of cheap rum. It's no wonder the men drank it with such determination. This reliance on alcohol and tainted water leads to a historical debate about the health of sailors. Was grog, in a strange way, a health benefit? Some historians argue yes. The alcohol in the rum, however diluted, would have killed some of the more dangerous bacteria lurking in the foul water, making it safer to drink than the water alone. In this sense, grog was a crude, unintentional form of water purification. The daily rum ration, they argue, may have inadvertently saved countless sailors from waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery. On the other hand, other scholars argue that the negative effects of chronic, low-level alcohol consumption far outweighed any potential benefits. It led to dehydration, as alcohol is a diuretic, impaired judgment, and contributed to the violence and accidents that were commonplace on ships. Furthermore, the constant consumption of alcohol could have masked or worsened the symptoms of other underlying diseases like scurvy. So was grog a lifesaver or a slow poison? The answer is likely both. You take another long drink from your cup. The initial burn of the rum gives way to the slick, slightly thick texture of the water, with its faint, swampy aftertaste. It doesn't quench your thirst so much as it replaces it with a dull warmth in your belly and a slight buzz in your head. You look around at the other men, sipping their own grog. This is the social lubricant of the ship. It's what you drink to celebrate a captured prize and what you drink to endure the endless boredom between fights. It's medicine, poison, and your only escape from the taste of the sea and the salt. You drain your cup, the slimy liquid leaving a film on your teeth. It's disgusting, and you can't wait for your ration tomorrow. The man in charge of turning your rations of weevil biscuit and salt brick meat into something resembling a meal is the ship's cook. Forget any image of a jolly, plump chef. The cook on a pirate ship was often a man who was too old or too injured for the heavy work of sailing and fighting. The most famous fictional pirate cook, Long John Silver, had a wooden leg, and this was a common reality. The job was often given to a man with a disability, a lame sailor who could still be useful in the galley. Sometimes, this man was also the ship's musician, or even the surgeon's assistant, a jack of all trades in the ship's domestic sphere. His domain, the galley, is not a gleaming kitchen. On smaller ships, it might not even be a room. It's often just a designated corner of the deck containing a camboose, a simple iron stove box filled with sand on which a fire could be safely lit. This was a precarious setup. In heavy weather, cooking was impossible, as the risk of the stove tipping over and setting the entire ship ablaze was too great. On those days, you would eat your hardtack cold in your salt meat trough. The cook's job is one of relentless monotony. He has a very limited pantry to work with the barrels of salt meat, the sacks of hardtack, some dried peas or beans, and perhaps a cask of oatmeal. His culinary artistry is confined to boiling, stewing, and mixing these few ingredients in different combinations. The result is an endless rotation of brownish, formless slop, served in a communal pot or bucket from which the men would dip their own bowls or cups. The signature dish, which you eat several times a week, is a stew called lobscouse. The recipe is simple. The cook soaks the salt beef for hours to leach out the worst of the salt, then boils it to death with broken up hardtack and maybe some onions if any are left. The whole thing cooks down into a thick, porridge-like stew. It's bland, it's salty, and its texture is uniformly mushy, but it's hot, and on a cold night watch, that's enough. Another favorite is skilly gaily, which was often just oatmeal boiled in the water the meat had been steeped in, giving it a greasy, slightly meaty flavor. It was a thin, watery gruel designed to stretch the last of the food supplies. But here is where you encounter a strange and rather stomach-churning piece of culinary lore from the age of sail, the slush fund. Slush was the name given to the greasy, fatty scum that was skimmed off the top of the pot after boiling the salted meats. This was a valuable byproduct. The cook would collect this fat in a bucket or cask. It was a greasy, congealed, and frankly rancid substance. He could then sell this slush to tallow makers in port, who used it to make candles and soap. The money he made was his personal perk, a bonus to his meager share. This is the origin of the term slush fund, a supplementary source of money, often from questionable origins. Some of this slush, however, never made it to port. A particularly unscrupulous cook might mix this rancid fat back into the lobscouse or use it to fry up some crumbled hardtack, adding calories but also a distinct flavor of decay to the meal. You might be eating food that has been enriched with a substance that was destined for a candle factory. The quality of the cook's creations was a constant source of tension and a subject of historical debate. Did the cook have any real impact on the crew's health and morale? A good cook, one who was clean by the standards of the day and resourceful, could make the monotonous rations more palatable, lifting the crew's spirits. A bad cook, lazy, dirty, and uninspired, could make life miserable. His disgusting food could lower morale and even contribute to sickness if he was careless with hygiene. Historical accounts are full of sailors' complaints about their cooks. Some pirate articles even included clauses allowing the crew to vote on whether to punish or dispose of a particularly bad cook. He held a position of low status, but his influence on the daily life and mood of the ship was immense. Was a happy crew the result of a lucky streak of captures, or was it the result of a cook who knew how to make a decent pot of skilly gale? It's a domestic question often lost in the grand tales of piracy. You watch the cook, a one-eyed man named Finn, stir a large pot with a wooden paddle. A plume of greasy steam rises, carrying a familiar smell of boiled meat and stale water. He is a grumpy, silent man, but you have to admit, on the days he cooks, the food is slightly less horrible. Yesterday, a different man was on duty, and the lobscouse had a suspicious, gray sheen to it that no one dared comment on. You take your bowl and get in line. You don't know what combination of ingredients is in the pot today, and frankly, you're not sure you want to. You just hope Finn was feeling generous and didn't dip too heavily into his slush bucket. As the voyage stretches on, the line between edible and rotten becomes increasingly blurry. The ship's provisions, which were of questionable quality to begin with, are now actively decomposing. This is not a slow, gentle process. It is a full-scale assault on your senses. The most immediate sign is the smell wafting up from the cargo hold. It's a rich, complex aroma of decay, the sweet, sickly scent of molding grain, the sharp, sour tang of fermenting water, and the deep, putrid stench of meat that is starting to go truly bad. Your job sometimes involves going down into the hold to fetch provisions, and it's a journey into a special kind of hell. The air is thick and stagnant. The sacks of flour and oats are dampened, covered in patches of black and green mold. When you open a sack, a puff of spores explodes into the air, catching in your throat and making you cough. You can see where the rats have chewed through the canvas, their droppings mingling with the grain. This is the flour that will be used for your biscuits and stews. The salted meat, once your unappetizing but stable source of protein, is beginning to turn. Despite the heavy salting, bacteria and mold have found a way in. When the cook opens a barrel, the smell can be overpowering. The meat inside might be slimy to the touch, or have a greenish, iridescent sheen. The cook's job is to salvage what he can. He'll scrape off the worst of the slime and mold, and then boil the meat for an extra long time, hoping that the heat will kill whatever is living on it. However, cannot be boiled away. The meat has a new, pungent flavor, a taste of putrescence that no amount of salt or grog can fully disguise. You are now in a constant state of gastrointestinal roulette. Every meal is a gamble. Will this chunk of meat make you sick? Will the moldy biscuit lead to a night of agonizing cramps? You learn to trust your senses. but even they can be unreliable. You sniff a piece of meat with the cautious air of a bomb disposal expert. You examine a biscuit for any unusual colors or textures. The older sailors have a rule of thumb. If it's just moldy, you can scrape it off. If it's slimy, you should be wary. If it moves on its own, you might want to pass. And this brings us to a little known and deeply unpleasant part of the pirate pantry, the cheese. When pirates captured a prize, cheese was a celebrated loot. But cheese, especially in the tropical heat, does not last long. It becomes a living ecosystem. The most common inhabitant was the cheese skipper, the larva of a small black fly. These tiny maggots have the unnerving ability to launch themselves into the air by flexing and releasing their bodies. Skipping several inches, a block of aged cheese would be literally crawling and hopping with them. For pirates, this was not necessarily a deal breaker. A common practice was to simply cut away the most infested parts of the cheese and eat the rest. Some hard-bitten sailors would even eat the cheese, skippers and all, considering them just another form of protein, much like the weevils in their biscuits. The consumption of this decaying food leads to a historical debate that is difficult to resolve. How did pirates distinguish between food that was lethally toxic? We know about botulism and other deadly foodborne illnesses today, but they had no such scientific framework. Their knowledge was based on folk wisdom, superstition, and brutal, often fatal, trial and error. Some historians believe they must have developed a sophisticated, if unwritten, understanding of the signs of truly dangerous spoilage. They might have learned, for instance, to be wary of meat from a barrel whose lid had bulged outwards from the pressure of gas-producing bacteria. Others argue that it was mostly a matter of sheer luck. They ate what they had to, and if a man died after a meal, the crew would simply avoid that particular barrel of meat in the future. The life of a pirate was already so cheap, and death so common, that a death from food poisoning might have been seen as just another unfortunate accident, another cost of doing business. You are given your ration for the day, a stew of indeterminate origin. It has the usual salty taste, but underneath there's a new, sour note you can't quite place. You see the man next to you discreetly spit a mouthful back into his bowl. You, however, are too hungry to care. You close your eyes, block out the smell, and eat. You tell yourself it's just your imagination. You tell yourself that the cook boiled it long enough. But as you swallow, you can't help but wonder what exactly you have just introduced into your body. You are caught in a paradox. The very food that is supposed to keep you alive might be the thing that kills you. And as you try to fall asleep that night, every gurgle and cramp in your stomach feels like a ticking clock. The physical insults to your body have been constant and varied: the filth, the pests, the sun, the bad food. But now, a new enemy is making its presence felt. It's not an external force, but an internal one. It begins subtly. You feel a profound and unshakable weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep doesn't seem to touch. Your muscles ache, and you feel irritable and low-spirited. The older sailors call it the seasickness of the soul. They don't know its name, but you are feeling the first insidious symptoms of scurvy. This is the most infamous of all maritime diseases, the scourge of the age of sail. It is, as we now know, caused by a severe deficiency of vitamin C, ascorbic acid. The human body cannot produce its own vitamin C, so it must be obtained from the diet, specifically from fresh fruits and vegetables. Your diet of hardtack and salted meat contains virtually none. After about a month, or to its sea with no fresh provisions, your body's small reserve of vitamin C is depleted, and the physiological decay begins. At first, it's easy to dismiss the symptoms. You're on a pirate ship, after all. Who wouldn't be tired and grumpy? The work is hard, the sleep is poor, and the food is terrible. You attribute your aching joints to the dampness and the hard labor. You blame your low mood on the endless monotony of the sea. But then other, more specific signs begin to appear. You might notice small, dark purple spots on your skin, particularly on your legs and thighs. These are perifollicular hemorrhages, tiny bleeds from the capillaries around your hair follicles. They look like a strange, dark rash. You might also notice that your gums feel a bit tender. Nothing major at first, just a slight soreness when you're gnawing on your tough salt beef. You are in the early stages of a disease that, if left unchecked, will systematically dismantle your body from the inside out. Vitamin C is essential for the production of collagen, the protein that acts as the glue for your body's tissues. It holds your skin together, anchors your teeth in their sockets, and gives strength to your blood vessels. Your body literally starts to fall apart. And here we come to a little known and rather melancholy detail about the onset of scurvy and its psychological effects. Long before the more dramatic physical symptoms appear, scurvy often manifests as lethargy, depression, and a strange, unmotivated despair. Sailors would become listless, withdrawn, and unable to perform their duties, not because of physical inability, but due to a complete lack of will. Captains and officers often mistook these early signs for laziness or insubordination, punishing men who were, in fact, in the grip of a serious illness. The laziness of a sailor was often the first cry for help from a body starved of a vital nutrient. This early stage of the disease is a topic of debate among medical historians. How prevalent was scurvy? Really, the dramatic, late-stage symptoms are well documented. But how many sailors on any given voyage were suffering from a low-level, subclinical scurvy that never progressed to the horrific final stages but still impacted their health, mood, and efficiency? Some historians argue that a significant percentage of all sailors in this era were in a constant state of mild scurvy, with their health and vitality permanently compromised. This would have been the normal state of being for a seaman. Others contend that the human body is more resilient, and that crews were oft unable to replenish their vitamin C stores during brief stops in port, keeping full-blown scurvy at bay for most of their careers. They argue that the truly devastating outbreaks we read about were the exception, not the rule. Was life at sea a constant battle against low-level scurvy, or were there long periods of relative health punctuated by acute crises? You feel a deep ache in your shins. The purple spots on your thighs seem to be spreading. You try to hide your weakness, forcing yourself to climb the rigging and pull the ropes with a strength you no longer feel. Showing weakness on a pirate ship is dangerous. It makes you a liability. You see the same weariness in the eyes of some of your shipmates. You see them rubbing their legs, wincing as they move. A quiet, invisible plague is creeping through the crew, and no one dares to name it, but the signs are there, subtle and sinister. The glue that holds you together is beginning to dissolve, and this is just the beginning of the horror. Your smile, which has had little reason to appear lately, is about to become a source of profound dread. The vague soreness in your gums has now escalated into a full-blown crisis. You wake up one morning with a foul, metallic taste in your mouth. When you run your tongue over your gums, they feel swollen, puffy, and strangely soft, like a piece of overripe fruit. In the dim light of the 'tween deck, you manage to catch a glimpse of your reflection in a shard of polished metal. The sight is horrifying. Your gums are a deep, purplish red and so swollen that they have begun to grow over your teeth, almost concealing them in spongy, bleeding flesh. This is the classic, gruesome hallmark of advanced scurvy. The lack of vitamin C has caused the collagen in the soft tissues of your mouth to break down completely. Your gums are putrefying inside your head. They bleed at the slightest touch. Eating your rock-hard biscuit is now an exercise in pure agony. Every bite sends a jolt of pain through your jaw, and your mouth fills with the coppery taste of your own blood. Even drinking is difficult. The men around you are suffering the same fate. You see them trying to soften their biscuits to a near-liquid state, grimacing with every mouthful. The smell is the next thing you notice. A foul, necrotic odor begins to emanate from your mouth, a stench so powerful it's noticeable from a few feet away. It's the smell of rotting tissue. The combined breath of a crew in the grips of scurvy was said to be a weapon in itself, a miasma of decay, that could make even the most hardened sailor's stomach turn. This is the score, but I see stench, a well-documented symptom that signaled the ship was in deep trouble. And then, the teeth begin to loosen. At first, it's just a slight wiggling of an incisor. You can move it back and forth with your tongue. But soon, the decay of the gum tissue and the underlying ligaments of the jaw becomes so severe that your teeth lose their moorings entirely. They become loose enough to be pulled out with your fingers, with little to no pain, because the surrounding flesh is already dead. You see veteran sailors, men in their 30s, who are completely toothless, their mouths sunken in, their smiles just a gummy void. They didn't lose their teeth in epic tavern brawls, they lost them to a quiet, internal rot. This leads us to a strange and rather grim little piece of historical evidence related to scurvy, the scurvy grass myth. For centuries, sailors and doctors noticed that scurvy was a disease of long sea voyages and that it could be cured by returning to land eating fresh greens. They identified a number of plants, often bitter, weedy-looking things found along coastlines, that seemed to have a curative effect. They collectively called these plants scurvy grass. One of these was cochlear. Officials, here's the quirky part. While some of these plants did indeed contain vitamin C, their effectiveness was often wildly exaggerated. A desperate crew landing on an unknown shore would frantically gather and consume any green plant they could find, hoping it was the miraculous scurvy grass. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. The sailors were essentially conducting frantic, uncontrolled clinical trials on themselves, with their lives hanging in the balance. Their understanding was correct in principle, greens cure scurvy, but tragically flawed in its specifics. The devastating oral effects of scurvy raise a question that dental historians and bioarchaeologists still explore. When skeletal remains are found from this period, the damage from scurvy is starkly visible. Skulls show significant bone loss in the jaw and abscesses from rotting tooth sockets. By examining these remains, historians can paint a vivid picture of the suffering these sailors endured. But the debate continues, was this level of dental decay the norm for all seafarers? Or are the skeletons that we find a biased sample, representing only the most extreme and fatal cases? Did the average pirate live with a few loose teeth and their gums? Or was the complete, catastrophic dental collapse a common experience? The bones tell a story of immense suffering, but it's hard to know if they're telling the whole story or just its most tragic chapters. You feel one of your own molars. It moves under the pressure of your finger. A wave of panic and despair washes over you. Your body is failing in the most intimate and horrifying way. The simple act of eating, once a source of sustenance, is now a source of dread. The act of speaking is an embarrassment, as you try to hide the foul smell coming from your own mouth. You are rotting from the inside out, and the evidence is right there. Every time you try to smile, the romantic image of a pirate with a gold tooth seems like a bitter irony now. The reality for you and your crewmates is not a flashy dental accessory, but a slow, painful, and stinking descent into a toothless void. The horrors of scurvy are not content to confine themselves to your mouth. The disease now begins to revisit your past, exhuming old injuries you thought were long forgotten. A few years ago, perhaps you broke your arm falling from a horse, or got a deep gash on your leg in a knife fight. The bone healed. The skin knitted itself back together, leaving behind nothing but a faint silvery scar. You haven't thought about it in years. But now, that old injury is beginning to ache with a deep, throbbing pain. This is one of the most terrifying and surreal symptoms of advanced scurvy. The disease attacks the very fabric of your body's repair mechanisms. The collagen that your body used to form scar tissue is now breaking down. An old wound, perfectly healed for years, will begin to swell, turn a dark, bruised purple, and then slowly, gruesomely, split back open as if it were a fresh injury. The scarred tissue literally dissolves, leaving a raw, open or where there was once healed skin. Heel bone fractures could also break spontaneously, with the new bone matrix simply disintegrating. You look down at the old scar on your shin, and to your disbelief, you see it is now a weeping, open wound again. It doesn't bleed much, but it oozes a thin, watery fluid. It's as if your body's history is being unwritten, your past traumas returning to haunt you in the most physical way imaginable. This phenomenon was well documented by ship surgeons and observers in the 18th century, who described it with a sense of awe and horror. It seemed to defy all known principles of medicine. It was as if the body was cannibalizing its own past, devouring its own repairs. This process extends to your entire musculoskeletal system. Your joints swell up and become excruciatingly painful. Your knees, ankles, and wrists become so stiffened so that walking, or even just clenching your fist, is an ordeal. You and the other afflicted men now move with the slow, pain shuffle of old men. Climbing the rigging is an impossible, life-threatening task. You are becoming a ghost on your own ship, too weak to work, too miserable to do anything but lie in your hammock, listening to the groans of the ship and the groans of the men around you. This symptom leads to a strange and little-known piece of medical history. In the 17th and 18th centuries, before the role of vitamin C was understood, physicians proposed countless bizarre theories for the cause of scurvy. One of the more popular theories was that it was a disease of melancholy or nostalgia. Doctors observed that sailors suffering from scurvy were listless and depressed, and they mistook the symptom for the cause. They believed that a sailor's longing for home and his despair at being at sea for so long caused a sort of corruption of his bodily humors, leading to the physical decay. In a way, they weren't entirely wrong. The psychological symptoms were real. They just had the cause and effect completely backwards. They weren't reading a nutritional deficiency with hopeful words and attempts to cheer up the patient, a tragically ineffective prescription. The reopening of old wounds creates a complex historical puzzle that researchers still grapple with. How did this specific symptom of scurvy affect pirate power dynamics and crew co? Hygiene, a pirate's reputation and authority were often built on his physical prowess, his scars a testament to his survival in past battles. A captain with a fearsome scar across his face commanded respect. But what happened when that same captain, in the grips of scurvy, had his legendary scar dissolve into a weeping, foul-smelling sore? Did his authority dissolve with it? How did the crew react when their strongest and most fearsome fighters were reduced to whimpering invalids, haunted by the ghosts of their own past victories? Some historians argue that this aspect of the disease was a great equalizer, reducing all men, regardless of rank or reputation, to the same level of suffering and vulnerability. Others suggest it could have led to brutal shifts in power, where healthier crew members might see an opportunity to challenge a weakened leader. Did a scurvy outbreak lead to a grim, desperate form of solidarity, or did it ignite a powder keg of ambition and betrayal? You lie in your hammock, your reopened wound throbbing in time with the rolling of the ship. Every old ache and pain you've ever had seems to have returned with a vengeance. Your body, once a reliable, flawed vessel, has become a house of horrors. It is actively deconstructing itself, turning your personal history of survival into a fresh landscape of pain. The physical weakness is profound, but it's the psychological terror that is truly unbearable. Your body has turned against you. It is betraying its own past, and you have no idea how to make it stop. In the midst of this plague of scurvy and the constant threat of infected wounds, you finally have a reason to meet the ship's primary medical expert. Don't picture an errand physician in a scholar's robe. On a pirate ship, the role of the surgeon was usually a case of whoever is least likely to kill you by accident. More often than not, this duty fell to the ship's carpenter or the cook. Why the carpenter? The logic, in a grim way, makes sense. A carpenter is an expert with a saw and chisel. He knows how to cut through hard materials cleanly and efficiently. Amputating a limb, in this worldview, was not so different from sawing off a damaged piece of the mast. It was a structural repair. The carpenter already had the essential tools: saws, knives, and mallets. He understood leverage and angles, His entire job was about mending broken things, and on this ship, a man's leg was just another broken thing. If you were exceptionally lucky, your crew might have persuaded a real surgeon from a captured vessel to join your ranks, but this was a rare prize. For the most part, you were putting your life in the hands of a man whose primary qualification was his skill with wood. You watch him at work. Let's call him Silas, HES the ship's carpenter. A large, quiet man with hands as tough as oak. His medical chest is a simple wooden box containing the tools of his two trades, alongside hammers and nails. You see his surgical instruments. There is no gleaming stainless steel here. You see a variety of saws, from a large, coarse-toothed amputation saw to smaller, finer ones for bone. There are wicked-looking curved knives for cutting through flesh and long, sharp probes for exploring wounds. None of these tools are sterilized. After an operation, Silas might wipe them clean on a rag and put them back in the box, still coated with a thin film of dried blood and tissue from the last patient. The concept of germ theory is more than a century away. The idea that invisible creatures could cause infection is pure fantasy. A young crewmate, Jem, has a badly infected wound on his lower leg from a fall. It's swollen, dark, and smells foul. Gangrene has set in. The decision has been made the leg must come off to save his life. You and several other men are tasked with holding him down. There is no anesthetic. The only mercy offered is a large swig of raw, undiluted rum, or perhaps a leather strap to bite down on to keep from biting through his own tongue. The procedure is brutal, swift, and loud. Silas, the carpenter surgeon, ties a leather tourniquet high up on Jem's thigh to reduce blood flow. Then, with a long knife, he makes a circular cut through the skin and muscle, laying the bone bare. Jem's screams are inhuman. Then Silas picks up his saw. The sound is unforgettable, wet, rasping noise as the teeth bite into the living bone, punctuated by the rhythmic grunts of Silas's effort and Jem's shrieks of agony. It's over in less than a minute. The severed leg is unceremoniously dropped into a bucket. But the ordeal isn't over. Now comes the cauterization. Silas takes several small metal tools with flat, circular heads and heats them in the galley's fire until they glow reed hot. He then presses these searing irons onto the stump, burning the blood vessels shut to stop the bleeding. The smell of burning flesh fills the air, and Jem, mercifully, faints from the pain. The final step is to cover the charred stump with a dressing of tar, another crossover from the world of carpentry. The hot tar was believed to seal the wound against the bad air, a crude and filthy, but sometimes effective, barrier. Herein lies a peculiar and little-known aspect of pirate society, the value of a lost limb. According to some surviving pirate articles, like those of Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, there was a form of workman's compensation. A pirate who lost a limb in battle or in service to the ship was entitled to a hefty one-timement from the common plunder before it was divided. Losing a right arm might be worth 600 pieces of 8 a leg, might be worth 500. This was a fortune. This system ensured that a man who was maimed could no longer fight or work as an able-bodied sailor was not simply cast aside. He had a golden parachute of sorts. This compensation system creates a fascinating historical debate. Was this system an early, progressive form of social insurance, showing that pirates had a more compassionate and fair society than the nations they preyed upon? Or was it a purely pragmatic business decision? Some historians argue for the former, seeing it as evidence of a pirate brotherhood that truly cared for its own. They were creating a fairer, more egalitarian world on their ships. More cynical historians argue it was all about morale. A man is more willing to risk his limbs in a fight if he knows his potential loss is financially covered. It made pirates fight harder and take more risks, which was good for business. Was it compassion or cold, hard calculation? The truth is likely a mixture of both. You look at Jim, pale and unconscious. You look at Silas wiping his bloody saw on an oily rag. You have just witnessed the peak of medical science on this vessel. It is brutal, it is terrifying, and its success rate is terrifyingly low. Jem has survived the surgery, but his real battle against shock and infection has just begun. You now understand that on this ship, the surgeon's saw is as much a threat as an enemy's cutlass. The surgery you just witnessed was a desperate, violent act of preservation. But the cleanliness of the procedure is a concept that simply does not exist. Silas the carpenter may have wiped his saw, but the notion of sterilizing it with heat or alcohol beforehand is utterly foreign. His hands are covered in tar and grime. The rag he uses is stiff with the filth of a dozen other jobs. The air itself is thick with the spores of mold in the general effluvia of the ship. You have just seen a septic surgery, and what follows is the almost inevitable consequence infection. Jem, the boy who lost his leg, lies in his hammock, shivering with a fever despite the tropical heat. His ordeal is far from over in many ways. It has just begun. The stump of his leg, which was sealed with tar, is now swollen, red, and hot to the touch. A thin, foul-smelling pus has begun to seep from beneath the tar dressing. The infection that was in his lower leg was not fully removed. It was simply given a new, freshly traumatized to flourish in. He is in the grip of what they call putrid fever or hospital fever, a catch-all term for the systemic infection that we would now call sepsis. The lack of understanding of germs is the single greatest cause of death after any kind of medical procedure. The historical record is clear on this. In the great naval battles of the 18th century, far more men died in the days and weeks after the battle from infected wounds than died on the day of the battle itself. A man might survive a cannonball taking his leg, only to be killed by the invisible organisms introduced by the surgeon's unwashed hands. There is no treatment for this. The crew can only watch and wait. They might try to cool his fever with damp rags, or force some water and rum between his lips. But they are fighting a war against an enemy they cannot see or comprehend. They blame the infection on an imbalance of his humors, or on the bad air from the bilge, or simply on bad luck. The idea that the surgeon himself, in his attempt to save a life, was the one who introduced the fatal sickness is unthinkable. He did everything according to the knowledge of his time. And this brings us to a strange and somewhat gruesome detail about wound care in the 18th century, the concept of laudable pus. Many surgeons of the era believed that the formation of thick, creamy, white or yellowish pus in a wound was a good sign. They thought it was the body expelling the malignant humors and that it was a necessary part of the healing process. They would be more concerned by a wound that was dry and inflamed than one that was weeping with this laudable pus. What they were actually observing, of course, was a classic staphylococcus infection. While this type of infection could sometimes be overcome by a strong immune system, it was still a serious condition. In their ignorance, they were celebrating a sign of a potentially fatal bacterial invasion. A surgeon might proudly point to a stump oozing with pus and declare that the patient was on the road to recovery. This misunderstanding of infection fuels a long-standing historical debate: was surgery in the age of sail a net positive, or a net negative? In other words, did the average surgical patient have a better chance of survival with the intervention, or without it? This is a shockingly difficult question to answer. For a condition like gangrene, where death was almost certain without amputation, the brutal, septic surgery still offered a slim chance of survival. In this case, it was a net positive. But what about for a simpler wound? Like a deep cutlass slash or a musket ball in the shoulder? Was the surgeon's probing with his dirty fingers, undone sterilized tools, more likely to introduce a fatal infection than the wound itself? Some medical historians argue that, in many cases, the best thing a surgeon could do was nothing at all, a concept known as expectant treatment. They contend that for many injuries, a patient's chances were better if they were simply left alone to allow their own immune system to fight the battle. Others argue that stopping bleeding through cauterization and removing foreign objects like musket balls were essential interventions that saved lives. Despite the high risk of subsequent infection, the debate essentially pits the immediate, visible threat bleeding against the invisible, poorly understood one infection. A week after his surgery, Jem dies. His fever consumes him, and he slips into a delirium from which he never awakens. His body, wrapped in a piece of old sailcloth and weighted down with a cannonball, is slid over the side in a brief, somber ceremony. His share of the plunder is reabsorbed into the general fund. His life was not taken by an enemy cannon, but by the very tools meant to save him. You look at Silas the carpenter who stands grim-faced at the rail, but you wonder what he thinks. Does he see this as a failure, or just an inevitability? Does he question his methods? Probably not. He did what he knew how to do. The outcome was in God's hands, or fate's, or the devil's. It was just another death at sea. And it serves as a chilling reminder that on the ship, the line between healing and killing is terrifyingly thin. While the spectacular horrors of scurvy and septic surgery command your attention, a more mundane and insidious killer is constantly at work on the ship. This killer doesn't arrive with the dramatic crash of a cannonball or the slow, visible decay of rotting gums. It arrives silently, in a sip of contaminated water or the bite of a louse. This is the world of infectious disease, the fevers that could sweep through a crew and wipe out more men than the most ferocious naval battle. The most common and feared of these is dysentery, known to the sailors as the bloody flux or the gripes. It's an intestinal infection, usually caused by bacteria like Shigella or amoebas, and it thrives in the filthy conditions of your floating home. It spreads through the fecal-oral route, a polite way of saying it's a disease of filth. Given you're shared, unwashed to a rag at the head, the contaminated water barrels, and the cook's less than hygiene practices, it's a miracle the entire crew isn't constantly afflicted. When the flux takes hold, it is a miserable and debilitating illness. It begins with agonizing abdominal cramps, a feeling like your insides are being twisted into knots. This is followed by a violent, unrelenting diarrhea. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a dehydrating, weakening ordeal that can leave a man too feeble to stand. In its most severe form, the bloody flux, the stool contains blood and mucus, a sign of severe damage to the intestinal lining. A man in the grip of the flux would become pale, gaunt and weak, wasting away in his hammock. There was no cure. The only treatment was to lie still, try to sip some water, and pray your body could fight it off. Many didn't. Dehydration and exhaustion would claim them. Then there was typhus, the ship fever you've already worried about, spread by the lice in your clothes. It's a disease of crowding and filth. Its symptoms are sudden and severe high fever, intense headaches, muscle pain, and eventually a characteristic spotted rash. It could lead to delirium and death in a matter of weeks. A typhus outbreak could turn a powerful warship into a ghost ship, drifting aimlessly with a crew of dead and dying men. And we can't forget the diseases of the tropics, where you now sail. Malaria and yellow fever, both spread by mosquitoes, were a constant threat, especially when the ship was anchored near a swampy coastline or the crew went ashore in a port town. Yellow fever, or yellow jack, was particularly terrifying. It caused fever, chills, and muscle aches, but then progressed to a more horrifying stage where it attacked the liver, causing jaundice, a yellowing of the skin and eyes, and internal bleeding. The final, fatal symptom was often the black vomit, where the patient would vomit up digested blood that looked like coffee grounds. This brings us to a strange and specific piece of historical trivia related to disease prevention. While pirates and sailors had no concept of germ theory, they did have a strong belief in the power of smell. They believed that diseases were spread by miasmas, or bad airs, that rose from swamps, filth, and decaying matter. To combat these miasmas, They believed in the power of strong, pleasant smells. A common preventative measure was to burn pitch or gunpowder on the decks. Acrid smoke was thought to purify the air and drive away the invisible poisons of disease. They were essentially trying to fight a smell with a stronger smell. While this did nothing to kill bacteria or deter mosquitoes, the thick, billowing smoke might have had the unintended side effect of acting as a temporary, if inefficient, insect repellent. This belief in miasmas leads to an ongoing historical debate. Did the pirates' own lifestyle choices make them more or less susceptible to these diseases compared to, say, Royal Navy sailors on one hand? Pirates often had more varied diets in their boom periods, which could have boosted their immune systems. They also had the freedom to avoid known unhealthy locations. The pirate captain could simply decide not to anchor near a notoriously swampy, mosquito-infested bay. On the other hand, their ventures into the notoriously unhealthy port towns of the Caribbean and West Africa for carousing could have exposed them to a host of diseases. Navy sailors, by contrast, were subject to the orders of their commanders, who might force them to remain in unhealthy harbors for weeks on end for strategic reasons. But the Navy also had stricter, though still inadequate, rules about hygiene and ship cleanliness. So who was safer, the free-roaming but reckless pirate, or the disciplined but constrained Navy man? The evidence is inconclusive, as sickness was rampant in both populations. You see a man named Thomas, a strong young sailor who joined the same time you did, being carried to his hammock. His skin has a faint yellow tinge, and his eyes are glassy with fever. The older sailors shake their heads and mutter the dreaded words, "Yellow Jack." There is nothing anyone can do. The ship's carpenter surgeon has no saw for this. The fevers are an enemy you cannot fight with a cutlass or a cannon. They are an invisible, silent force that moves through the crew, choosing its victims seemingly at random. You lie in your own hammock, swatting at a mosquito buzzing near your ear, and feel a new kind of fear. It's not the fear of battle or drowning. It's the fear of your own breath, the water you drink, and the very air you inhale. Your journey so far has been an assault on nearly every sense. But there is one place on the ship that is the undisputed heart of all foulness, the source code of the vessel's stench. This is the bilge. You have smelled its foul breath seeping up through the floorboards since your first day. But now, a blockage in the pump suction means someone has to go down there. And you, being one of the newer, more expendable members of the crew, have drawn the short straw. The bilge is not a room, it's the lowest, darkest, most forgotten space in the ship. It's the area at the very bottom of the hull, beneath the cargo hold and the floorboards you walk on. It's designed to collect all the water that inevitably leaks through the ship's seams, but it collects so much more, over the months and years of a ship's life. The bilge becomes a primordial soup of filth. An older sailor hands you a bucket and a rope, and reluctantly, you are lowered through a small hatch into the oppressive darkness. The smell hits you like a physical blow. It's a thick, gag-inducing concentration of every bad smell you've ever encountered, amplified 100 times. It's the smell of stagnant seawater, rotting wood, and black, sulfurous mud. But there are other notes in this symphony of stink. It's the accumulated waste of the entire voyage. Spilled rum, vomit from seasick sailors, urine, blood from the makeshift surgery, spoiled food scraps that have fallen through the cracks, the grease and slush from the cook spot. It all ends up here. It all mixes together into a single, horrifying liquid. The water at the bottom is not water. It's a thick, black, oily sludge several inches deep. As the ship rolls, it sloshes from side to side with a sickening sucking sound. This is the bilge water. It is a perfect anaerobic environment, a breeding ground for bacteria that produce hydrogen sulfide gas, the source of that characteristic rotten egg smell. Breathing this air for too long can be dangerous, even lethal. Your job is to find the intake for the bilge pump, a simple pipe with a strainer at the end, and clear it of whatever is blocking it. You wade into the sludge, the cold, greasy liquid soaking through your breeches and clinging to your skin. You feel things brush against your leg in the darkness, lumps of rotting wood, things you can't identify and don't want to. And then there are the bodies. The bilge is the final resting place for countless rats that have drowned in the slop, their bloated bodies floating in the murk. You push one away with your hand, your stomach heaving. And here we come to a little known and truly disgusting job on a ship, the bilge diver. In the Royal Navy, and likely on pirate ships as well, when the pump was irrevocably clogged, a man would have to actually dive fully submerged into this filth to clear a blockage from below the waterline. It was one of the most dangerous and unpleasant jobs imaginable. The man would be paid a significant bonus for the task, often a large ration of rum, both for courage beforehand and as a futile attempt to disinfect himself afterward. It was a job for the most desperate or the most foolish. The state of a ship's bilge water has become a fascinating topic for a very specific group of scientists, maritime archaeologists who study shipwrecks. When a ship sinks, the contents of its bilge are often sealed in an anaerobic environment, preserving them for centuries. By carefully excavating and analyzing this bilge sludge, archaeologists can learn an incredible amount about life on the ship. They can find preserved seeds and pollen, telling them about the ship's diet and its recent ports of call. They can find insect remains, fish bones, and human parasites, painting a vivid picture of the ship's ecosystem and the health of its crew. The filthiest, most disgusting part of the ship becomes a priceless historical archive. The debate among these experts is often about interpretation. Can we assume the bilge of one shipwreck is representative of all ships of its era? How much does the local environment of the wreck site alter the chemical makeup of the sludge? Over centuries, a ship's last, foulest secret becomes a rich source of data and scholarly argument. You finally find the pump suction. It's clogged with a disgusting mass of rope fibers, wood chips, and what feels like a half-decomposed rat. You hold your breath, reach into the slime, and pull the blockage free with your bare hands. The pump above can now draw suction. Your job is done. You are hauled back up into the comparatively fresh air of the cargo hold, dripping with black, stinking ooze. You are a mess. The smell clings to you, a perfume of pure putrescence. Your crewmates give you a wide berth. There is not enough water on the ship to wash this filth off. You will carry the scent of the bilge with you for days, a walking, breathing reminder of the rotten heart of your new home. You have been to the very bottom, and it is a place you will never, ever forget. After months at sea, your ship is no longer just dirty on the inside. The outside, the very hull that keeps the ocean at bay, has become a shaggy, living mess. The smooth wooden planks are now encrusted with a thick layer of marine life. Barnacles, seaweed, and algae have attached themselves, creating a rough, trailing carpet of growth that slows the ship down considerably. More insidiously, a tiny mollusk called a shipworm, which is actually a type of clam, has been burrowing into the wood itself, riddling the hull with a network of tunnels that threaten its structural integrity. Your sleek, fast pirate vessel has become a floating, sluggish reef. To restore the ship's speed and to prevent it from literally being eaten from beneath you, the crew must undertake a massive, filthy, and back-breaking job careening. This is a fundamental and well-documented necessity of wooden shipbuilding. The process involves finding a deserted, sandy cove, waiting for high tide, and running the ship aground. As the tide goes out, the ship is left stranded on the beach, lying on its side. This exposes one entire half of the hull to the air, allowing the crew to get to work. The first step is to scrape off the marine growth. This is grueling, disgusting work. You are given a scraper, a simple long-handled tool with a metal blade, and you set to work hacking and prying at the thick crust of barnacles and seaweed. The smell is overpowering, a briny, fishy stench of decay. The barnacles are sharp, and you cut your hands on their shells. The sun beats down on your back. You are covered in slime and bits of shell, standing in a foul-smelling soup of seawater and scraped-off marine life. Once the hull is scraped clean of the major growth, the next step is to deal with the shipworms. The only way to kill them and prevent new ones from taking hold is to burn the surface of the hull. The crew lights controlled fires along the length of the wood, a process called bereaming. The wood is charred just enough to kill any burrowing organisms and dry out the planks. The air fills with the thick, acrid smoke of burning wood, sickeningly, the smell of cooking shipworms. The final step is to reseal the hull. You are handed a bucket of a foul-smelling mixture. It's a combination of tar, sulfur, and sometimes tallow or fish oil. Your job is to paint this hot, sticky goo over the entire surface of the hull. It's a nasty, messy job. The tar gets everywhere on your hands and your hair, on your clothes. This coating acts as a new layer of protection against the burrowing worms and helps to waterproof the wood. And here we find a peculiar and little-known tradition associated with careening. The process was a moment of great vulnerability for a pirate crew. Their ship was incapacitated, their cannons likely unloaded and stored to lighten the vessel. They were sitting ducks for any Navy patrol or rival pirates who might stumble upon them. To protect themselves, they would often establish a temporary, fortified camp on the shore, complete with lookouts and armed guards. This necessity led to the creation of temporary pirate havens all over the Caribbean, places like the Isle of Pines off Cuba. These careening spots became temporary homes, complete with makeshift shelters and cook fires. For a few days, you cease to be a sailor and become a shore-bound construction worker. The practice of careening raises a historical question that naval architects and historians still debate which of the common anti-fouling mixtures was actually the most effective. Was the classic iron-sulfur combination really the best option? Some records suggest mixtures containing arsenic or other poisons were used. Others propose that a layer of lead sheathing, though incredibly expensive, was the only truly effective long-term solution. The British Royal Navy experimented extensively with copper sheathing in the later 18th century, which proved to be a revolutionary breakthrough. But for a pirate crew operating on a budget and with limited resources, the choice of hull treatment was a constant source of experimentation and argument. Was it better to use a cheaper, less effective mixture more often, or to try and acquire more expensive materials for a longer-lasting solution? The debate on deck would have been a practical one of cost versus benefit. Once one side of the ship is done, the whole process is repeated. At the next high tide, the ship is refloated, turned around, and beached again to expose the other side. The entire process of careening could take a week or more. It is a period of intense labor and filth. But at the end of it, your ship is clean, sealed, and fast again. You have scoured away the accumulated grime of the ocean. You push the newly slick vessel back into the water, ready for the next hunt. Is that you and the crew are just as filthy as when you started, if not more so. You have given your ship a thorough bath, a luxury you would never be able to afford for yourselves. After the grueling process of careening the ship, the captain announces the news you've all been longing to hear. You've all been longing to hear you're heading to port. The destination isn't a respectable colonial capital like Kingston or Bridgetown, where the Royal Navy has a strong presence. You're headed for a pirate port, a place like the infamous Nassau on the island of New Providence during its Pirate Republic era. This is a town run by and for pirates, a place where you can sell your stolen goods, repair your ship, and, most importantly, spend your share of the plunder. As the ship navigates the tricky channels into the harbor, your first impression of the legendary pirate haven is not one of gleaming treasure and romantic freedom. It's the smell. You thought your ship was foul, but the port of Nassau has its own unique and powerful stench. It's a complex blend of raw sewage which flows directly into the harbor from the makeshift town, mixed with the smell of cheap rum, unwashed bodies, charcoal smoke, and rotting garbage piled high in the narrow streets. You have simply traded your floating cesspool for a stationary one. The town itself is a chaotic, sprawling mess. It's a collection of crude shacks, tents, and hastily constructed taverns and brothels, thrown together with wood salvaged from dismantled ships. There are no paved streets, only muddy tracks that turn into a soupy morass when it rains. Pigs, chickens, and strayed dogs wander freely, rooting through the piles of refuse. The place is noisy, crowded, and pulsing with a frantic, desperate energy. This is the shore-based headquarters of filth. You get your share of the recent prize, a small bag of silver coins, and step ashore, your legs unsteady after so long at sea. Your first stop, like every other man on the crew, is a tavern. These are not charming, wood-paneled inns. They are dim, dirty rooms, filled with rough wooden tables and benches. The floor is covered in a mixture of sand, sawdust, and spilled liquor. The air is thick with tobacco smoke and the roar of 100 conversations. You spend your silver on a tankard of rum, raw and fiery, that burns a trail down your throat. The hygiene in these establishments is, if possible, even worse than on your ship. The cups are given a quick rinse in a bucket of greasy, stagnant water before being refilled for the next customer. The food is of questionable origin, likely cooked by someone with an even looser grasp of sanitation than your own ship's cook. The people you meet here, other pirates, shady merchants, deserters, and women of fortune, are all part of the same unwashed fraternity. The standards of cleanliness you have become accustomed to at sea are the norm here on land. You don't stand out, you fit right in. And here we find a strange, and somewhat disgusting, piece of urban planning from these pirate havens. With no sanitation system, where did all the human waste from a town of thousands of pirates and hangers on go? The answer is everywhere. The back alleys were open latrines. The beach and the harbor itself were the primary dumping grounds. Archaeologists excavating sites like the ones in Port Royal, Jamaica, before it was destroyed by an earthquake, have found thick layers of what they politely call occupation debris, which is rich in organic material, including human waste. This created an incredibly unhealthy environment. These pirate towns were breeding grounds for typhoid, cholera, and dysentery, arguably even more so than the ships. This reality leads to a historical debate where pirate ports like Nassau's strategic advantage or a long-term liability for the Golden Age of Piracy. Some historians argue they were essential. They provided a safe harbor, a place to recruit, repair, and trade, which allowed the pirate ecosystem to flourish. They were the logistical hubs that made large-scale piracy possible. Without Nassau, they argue, the flying gang of famous pirates like Blackbeard, Sam Bellamy, and Calico Jack could never have existed. Other historians contend that these ports were a trap. By concentrating so many pirates in one notoriously unhealthy and chaotic location, they created a single point of failure. The squalor, disease, and constant drunken violence weakened the pirates from within. When the British governor Wood S. Rogers arrived in 1718 with a fleet and a royal pardon, the pirate republic collapsed with surprising speed, partly because its foundations were already rotten. Was Nassau the pirates' greatest strength or their fatal weakness? You spend your money quickly. A few days of heavy drinking, gambling, and paying for fleeting companionship, and your pockets are empty again. The brief dream of wealth is over. You are left with a pounding headache, an empty purse, and the same filthy clothes you arrived in. The port was not a paradise. It was just a larger, more crowded version of your ship, with more opportunities to part with your silver. As you stumble back towards the newly repaired vessel, ready to sign on for another voyage, you realize a grim truth. You didn't come to port to get clean. You came to port to get broke. The filth, both literal and metaphorical, is inescapable. Your time in port was a blur of rum-soaked revelry and fleeting pleasures. Now, as your ship pulls away from the foul-smelling harbor of Nassau, you and your crewmates are not leaving empty-handed. You may have spent all your silver, but you've acquired some new things to take back to sea. Unfortunately, these are not gleaming souvenirs. They are silent, invisible stowaways that you've picked up during your shore leave. you are carrying diseases, the kind that thrive in the squalid conditions of a pirate port. The most common and immediate of these souvenirs are venereal diseases. The brothels and taverns of Nassau were a hotbed of syphilis and gonorrhea. In an age with no antibiotics, these were not minor inconveniences, they were chronic, painful, and deeply stigmatizing conditions. Gonorrhea, known as the clap, caused painful urination and discharge. Syphilis, or the Great Pox, was far more terrifying. In its early stages, it caused painless sores followed by a rash, but if left untreated, it could enter a latent stage for years before re-emerging in its devastating tertiary form, attacking the brain, heart, and nervous system, leading to madness, paralysis, and death. You notice a few days out of port that some of your crewmates are complaining of a burning sensation when they visit the head. There is a sense of shame associated with these illnesses, even in a society as coarse as this one. The ship's surgeon, the carpenter, has no cure. He might offer some useless, and often painful, folk remedies, perhaps a primitive catheter or an injection of a buzz or substance into the urethra that did more harm than good. For the most part, a man just had to suffer through it, but you've brought more than just venereal diseases back with you. The crowded, unsanitary conditions of the port were ripe for the spread of other illnesses. The lice in the bedding of a cheap tavern could be carrying typhus. The contaminated water or food you consumed might have given you typhoid fever, a bacterial infection that causes a high, sustained fever, weakness, and stomach pains. These diseases have an incubation period, so a man could feel perfectly fine when he boarded the ship, only to fall gravely ill a week or two later, once you are far out at sea and isolated from any help. Your crew has unknowingly become a Trojan horse, carrying a deadly army of microbes back to the contained environment of the ship. This brings us to a little-known and morbid piece of maritime quarantine practice. Captains and naval authorities were not entirely ignorant of the dangers of bringing sickness from shore. While they didn't understand germs, they understood contagion. A common, if brutal, practice was to air out new recruits or men returning from shore leave. This meant keeping them isolated in a specific part of the ship, often in the forecastle at the bow, for a week or two to see if they developed any signs of fever before allowing them to mix with the general crew. Pirates, being less disciplined, were unlikely to follow such formal procedures, but a wary captain might keep a close eye on men returning from a particularly notorious port, watching for the first signs of a telltale rash or fever. The reintroduction of disease from ports creates a contentious debate among historians of piracy. How did pirates manage public health, and did their approach to it contribute to their downfall? Some argue that pirates, as outlaws, were completely undisciplined and that their shore leave practices were a form of collective suicide. They would bring devastating epidemics back to their ships, weakening their crews and making them vulnerable. The cycle of plunder, debauchery, and disease was, in this view, an unsustainable model. However, other historians argue that pirates may have been more pragmatic than we give them credit for. They might have developed their own informal quarantine rules. More importantly, their crews were in constant flux. A ship that lost half its men to a fever could simply sail to another pirate haven and recruit new, healthy members. In this sense, a pirate ship was less like a family and more like a company with high turnover. The individual pirates were disposable, but the enterprise of piracy itself could continue. Was a sick crew a sign of a failing ship, or was it just a temporary staffing problem? You feel a headache coming on. Is it just the lingering effects of too much rum, or is it the first sign of something worse? You look at your shipmates. The man who was boasting about his conquests in port is now quiet and walks with a pained stiffness. Another man, who seemed fine yesterday, is now flushed with fever, his eyes glassy. The party is over. The bill is coming due. The souvenirs you've brought back from the land are far more dangerous than any naval patrol, silent and patient, waiting to claim their price. The greatest danger you face is not from without, but from within your own ranks, and within your own body. The endless cycle of filth, disease, and violence begins to take a toll that is deeper than the sores on your skin or the ache in your gut. It begins to wear away at your mind. Life on this ship is a state of constant, low-grade stress and misery, punctuated by moments of extreme terror and brief, frantic bursts of hedonism. This environment is a perfect crucible for psychological decay. The boredom is a physical presence. For days, sometimes weeks on end, there is nothing to see but the endless, empty horizon. The work is repetitive and mind-numbing. The conversations are limited. You are trapped in a small, smelly, crowded space with the same group of men, many of whom are irritable, sick, or drunk. This crushing monotony, a well-documented aspect of life at sea, can lead to a state of profound lethargy and depression, a condition sailors called the Kalan Tour or the doldrums. The Kalan Tour was a strange and feared mental affliction. It was described as a form of delirium unique to sailors on long, hot voyages. A man in its grip would suddenly become convinced that the calm, shimmering sea was actually a beautiful green field or a meadow. He would be overcome with an irresistible urge to run and leap into it, often with a joyful cry before his shipmates could stop him. He would drown, a look of blissful confusion on his face, distinct psychosis brought on by heatstroke and dehydration, or was it a poetic term for a suicide driven by despair? We'll likely never know for sure. The filth itself is a psychological burden. Waking up every day in a damp, smelly hammock, surrounded by pests and the stench of decay, is demoralizing. The inability to ever be truly clean creates a sense of degradation, a feeling that you have been reduced to something less than human. It erodes your self-respect. You start to see yourself as the grime that covers you, dirty, disposable, and foul. Then there is the constant exposure to violence and death. You have seen men killed in battle, die of disease, and perish in accidents. Death is not an abstract concept, it's a frequent, casual occurrence. This normalization of death can lead to a profound emotional numbness, a hardened emotional numbness, a hardening of the soul. You build a wall around your empathy because caring too much is a liability. This emotional detachment, a form of what we might now call PTSD, is a survival mechanism, but it comes at the cost of your own humanity. And this brings us to a peculiar, and often overlooked, aspect of pirate life, their supposed love for music and entertainment. Many pirate ships made a point of recruiting a musician. He was a valued member of the crew, sometimes even getting an extra share of the plunder. Why? Because music was medicine for the soul. On those long, boring evenings, the sound of a fiddle or a pipe could temporarily lift the suffocating blanket of despair. It was a way to foster community, to remind the men of the world beyond their floating prison, and to drown out the sounds of sickness and misery. The pirates' famous love of sea shanties and drinking songs wasn't just about revelry, it was a desperate form of group therapy. The psychological state of pirates is the subject of intense debate among historians and psychologists. Were pirates, as a group, inherently psychopathic? Did the life attract men who were already lacking in empathy and prone to violence? This is the self-selection theory. It argues that the brutal realities of piracy didn't create monsters, they simply provided an ideal career path for men who already were. On the other hand, the environmental theory argues that the horrific conditions of life at sea, the filth, the disease, the violence, the constant stress were enough to break even a stable mind. This view suggests that piracy was a machine that took in desperate men and churned out traumatized, violent, and psychologically damaged individuals. Was the pirate a born predator, or was he a victim of his environment, twisted into a new shape by unimaginable hardship? You find yourself staring at the horizon, your mind a dull blank. You feel a strange detachment, as if you're watching your life happen to someone else. You see a fight break out between two crewmates over a trivial matter, their faces contorted with a rage that seems far out of proportion to the offense. You don't feel shock or fear. You just feel tired. You have become accustomed to the casual brutality, the constant discomfort, the ever-present stench. The man you were when you first stepped on the ship, the man who was shocked by the smell and the rats, is gone. He has been scoured away, replaced by this new, harder, and emptier version of yourself. You are surviving, yes, but you are beginning to wonder what part of you is being lost in the process. The ship is not just leaving scars on your skin, it is leaving them on your soul. The voyage has been long and brutal. You have survived storms, battles, sickness, and the slow, grinding misery of daily life. Now, as the ship finally limps towards a friendly port, you take a moment to conduct a personal inventory, to tally the true cost of this adventure. The promise was a short life but a merry one. The reality has been something quite different. Let's start with your body. It is a wreck. Your skin is a leathery, scarred landscape of sun damage, old sores, and the faint, discolored tracks of lice. You have a persistent cough from sleeping in the damp, moldy air of the 'tween deck. Your joints ache with a chronic dampness that feels like it has settled deep in your bones. A few of your teeth are loose in their sockets, a permanent souvenir from your brush with scurvy. Jagged scar on your forearm from a cutlass slash that got infected and healed badly. You are perhaps in your mid-20s, but you look and feel a decade or two older. The physical toll is undeniable. You have aged years in the span of months. Your worldly possessions amount to almost nothing. You have the filthy, patched clothes on your back and a small sea chest containing a spare shirt equally filthy, a tin cup, and maybe a knife. The small fortune in silver you earned from the last prize was spent in a few days of chaotic debauchery in port. You are no richer than the day you signed the articles. The dream of a grand treasure, of a chest overflowing with gold doubloons that would set you up for life, remains just that, a dream. For every pirate like Sam Bellamy, who captured the treasure-laden slave shipwide, there were 1,000 anonymous pirates who died with nothing in their pockets. The ship itself, your home and your workplace, is a testament to the journey's hardship. The sails are a patchwork of patches. The ropes are frayed. The wood is scarred from cannon fire and splintered from storms. It smells of bilge water, stale rum, and the ghosts of the men who have died within its hull. It is a floating microcosm of your own physical decay. It, like you, is barely holding itself together. And here we find a send-oft forgotten detail about the end of a pirate's career. For the few who survived long enough to want to retire. What did that retirement look like? It was rarely a life of comfortable ease in a seaside cottage. Many former pirates found it impossible to rejoin polite society. They were marked men, both physically by their scars and legally by their crimes. Many ended up as beggars or criminals in the very port towns they once terrorized. Some tried to use their sea skills to join merchant crews, but were often ostracized. The most successful retirement for many was to take a royal pardon, like the one offered by Wood S. Rogers, and become a pirate hunter, using their skills to hunt their former comrades. The transition from outlaw to respectable citizen was a journey few successfully made. This reality of the pirate's endgame fuels a final, overarching historical debate. Was the Golden Age of Piracy a failure from a purely financial and personal perspective? For the vast majority of individual pirates, the answer is an overwhelming yes. They exchanged a life of hard labor and low pay for a life of even greater hardship, disease, and the near certainty of a violent, early death. They died poor, sick, and forgotten. However, from a broader, socio-political perspective, the answer is more complex. Some historians argue that piracy, in its own chaotic way, was a form of social rebellion. It was a protest against the brutal conditions of the merchant marine and the Royal Navy, and the exploitative economic system of the empires. They created their own democratic, multicultural societies on their ships, however flawed and violent they were. In this view, their failure was a noble one, a brief, doomed experiment in radical freedom on the high seas. Others dismiss this as romantic nonsense, arguing that pirates were simply opportunistic criminals, motivated by greed, whose only legacy was violence and theft. Were they social bandits and proto-revolutionaries, or just thugs with a boat? You stand on the deck, feeling the gentle roll of the ship as it approaches the harbor. You have survived. That in itself is a victory of sorts. But what have you won? You are not rich. You are not healthy. You are not healthy. Because you will have to sign on for another voyage just to survive. You have traded one form of servitude for another, arguably a much harsher one. You have paid a steep price in body and soul, and for what a few moments of fleeting freedom may belly full of from the chance to live by your own rules. Even if those rules led directly to ruin, you look at your scarred hands and you don't have an answer. You only know that the journey has cost you dearly, and you are not the same man who stepped aboard all those months ago. You are standing on the shore again, back in a world that feels both familiar and alien. The ground beneath your feet is stable, a strange sensation after months of constant motion. The air doesn't smell of bilge water and tar, but of dust, cooking fires, and the press of 100 other lives. You have lived the life. You are a survivor of the Golden Age of Piracy. You look at the reflection of a stranger in a puddle of muddy water. The face staring back is thin, tanned, and aged beyond its years. The eyes hold a weariness that you recognize as your own. This is the face of a man who has seen too much and slept too little. This is the reality behind the legend. The romantic image of the pirate is a powerful and enduring one. It's a fantasy of rebellion, of freedom from the constraints of society, of a life lived on one's own terms. It's the swashbuckling hero with a twinkle in his eye, a parrot on his shoulder, and a chest full of treasure. It's an image of adventure, camaraderie, and defiance. That is the legend, but you have lived the reality. You know that the reality was not a flowing white shirt, but a garment stiff with filth and crawling with lice. You know the reality was not a diet of roasted pigs and fine wine, but of weevil-infested biscuits and salty, half-rotten meat. You know that the band of brothers was often a collection of desperate, sick, and traumatized men, held together by a fragile contract and the shared pursuit of survival. You know the true smell of piracy. It was not the clean, bracing scent of the salt sea. It was the stench of unwashed bodies, of scurvy rotted gums, of infected wounds, of stagnant bilge water, and of the cheap rum used to numb the pain of it all. The sound of piracy was not the joyful singing of sea shanties, but the scream of a man under the carpenter's saw, the groan of a fevered patient, and the endless, maddening scratching of a louse-infested scalp. And here we arrive at the final, quirky detail of this filthy world, a grace note of grime. Even the iconic pirate parrot, a staple of every good pirate story, was a part of this ecosystem of filth. These birds, often captured in the tropics, were not tidy house pets. They were messy, loud, and would have added their own droppings and discarded food scraps to the general squalor of the ship. More than that, they were carriers of their own unique set of avian diseases and bird mites, which could happily make the jump to a human host. The charming feathered companion on the captain's shoulder was likely just another vector for pests and disease, a colorful, talking contributor to the ship's overall lack of hygiene. The enduring myth of the clean or noble pirate is a question that has long fascinated historians and cultural critics. Why do we, as a society, choose to remember the fantasy and forget the foul reality? Some argue it's because the idea of the pirate represents a freedom and rebellion, and we clean up the story to make it more palatable. We need heroes, even anti-heroes, and the reality of the pirate's life is just too grim, too smelly, and too pathetic to fit that role. Others suggest it's a product of fiction, from Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island to modern Hollywood blockbusters, which have sanitized the story for a mass audience, creating a feedback loop where the fictional pirate has become more real than the historical one. We have collectively chosen to believe in the swashbuckling adventurer because the alternative, a sick, filthy, desperate man on a floating garbage heap, is just too depressing. You have seen both sides. You have heard the legends whispered in taverns, and you have lived the squalid truth. You understand now that the treasure of the pirates was not gold or silver. The real, elusive treasure was a clean bed, a fresh meal, a healthy body, and a moment of peace. It was a treasure that almost none of them ever found. As you walk away from the harbor, leaving that life behind, you carry its lessons with you. The greatest freedom, you realize, is not a lack of rules, but the freedom from filth, from hunger, and from constant, gnawing fear. The greatest adventure is not found in a battle on the high seas, but in the simple, quiet tact of surviving with your body and your spirit intact. You have been a pirate, and you are, beyond a shadow of a doubt, profoundly grateful to be one no more. The deck of the ship gently sways beneath you, but it is no longer the grubby, splintered wood of a pirate's loop. It feels softer now, warmer. The air no longer carries the sharp tang of tar and rot, but has sweetened into something calm and quiet. The endless, nagging itch has faded away, replaced by a feeling of deep, heavy comfort. The groans of the sick and the dying have softened into the gentle hum of a distant fan, the rhythmic sigh settling into the night. You can feel the weight of your journey lifting, the grime and the fear dissolving like sea mist in the morning sun. The memories of the hardtack and the salt be far gone, and in their place a vague, pleasant feeling of contentment, of a day well spent and a rest well earned. The faces of the crew, once so sharp and clear in their misery, now blur and soften, their harsh lines smoothing out as they drift away into the fog of sleep. They are characters in a story that has been told, their part now finished. You are floating now, not on a foul and churning sea, but in that peaceful, weightless space between wakefulness and dream. The gentle rocking is no longer a ship on the waves, but the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet anchor in the calm ocean of the night. The journey is over. You have returned to a safe harbor, a place of quiet and rest. There are no more duties to perform, no more duties to face. There is only the soft darkness and the promise of a deep and restorative peace. The end of the article. Good night.